Hi, everyone. So first, thanks so much for coming, Ron. I'm very excited to get to interview you. I'm the lucky chosen one here on that. So from, literally, I don't know if you've Googled Ron, but if you Google Ron's name, you get essentially just people singing your praise and the most admirable people in our industry. From Paul Graham to Ben
That's on
Horowitz.
page one.
That's literally, well, it depends what you filter for, I guess. Not later than a couple of days ago, Paul Graham was saying that no one works harder for founders than you do. And after 25 years doing this job, it's a pretty amazing thing to be able to say. To a large extent, your portfolio speaks for itself. So it's a crazy thing. And what I want to cover today is everything from how you started to how SV Angel operates today, what you look for in founders, the sort of common mistakes. And so with that in mind, first question, how'd you get into this industry?
So I was born and raised in San Francisco, which is kind of a coincidence because now San Francisco, you could say, is the tech hub of the universe. It doesn't always have to be that way, which is why it's so great that the family and Station F are operating in France and so many entrepreneurs are blossoming everywhere in the world. But I was fortunate to be born in San Francisco. Then I don't have a technical bone in my body. I was a political science major at San Jose State. But I immediately went to work at National Semiconductor, which is in the early 70s, it still had lots of fruit orchards in addition to semiconductor factories. But the great thing about National Semiconductor is it was kind of like the Marine Corps of companies, where the CEO was very dogmatic and would fire people very quickly if they didn't work hard. So that's where I got my work ethic. And then a group of us at National Semiconductor went off and started a computer company, and I ran sales and marketing for that company and eventually became the CEO, and that was called Altos Computer. And technology is all about disruption. Startups are all about disruption. And Altos was disrupting a bunch of companies that many of you have probably never heard of. Data General, Prime, Wang, Prime Computer.
Never heard of those. I agree.
But we were just disrupting the mini computer industry. But when you're disrupting, there's a lesson here. When you're disrupting, you always have to be a disruptor. So when you're disrupting, you have to disrupt yourself, or someone behind you will climb over you. So Altos disrupted the mini computer industry, but then behind us came the personal industry, and they disrupted us. Personal computers connected to the Ethernet turned every personal computer into a mini computer. We didn't see that, and we had to sell our company to Acer out of Taiwan. Now, our venture capitalist was Don Valentine of Sequoia Capital. Who's heard of Sequoia Capital? Quite a few, because Sequoia would be happy. Don Valentine's the founder. He also started his career at National Semiconductor. And Don Valentine, in the early 90s, told me, I think you would make a good angel investor. Why don't you come on some boards and see if you like mentoring founders? And from 1990 on, I just loved mentoring founders and eventually started venture funds on a more formal basis. But even though at Altos I managed 1,000 people, I realized I really didn't like managing people. But I did enjoy giving others advice based on what I had learned.
So when did you realize that was what you wanted to do for the rest of your career?
Really, right after I started serving on a few boards with Don Valentine, and then started investing my own money as an angel, I knew I'd be hooked for life. And I told people 30 years ago, I love giving founders advice. I'm going to do it the rest of my life. And it's true. It's what I'm going to do the rest of my life.
And you took a pretty crazy gamble back then. So everyone was investing in hardware, enterprise software. And you decided to look at something pretty radically different. What sort of drove you to do that at that point? Because there were probably not that many of you thinking about the internet and that sort of stuff.
Well, correct. So because I had come from the computer industry and we built hardware, the cost of goods of hardware is usually at least 60% of the price of the good. And the software industry seemed very exotic to me, because I said, wow, they don't have to go buy a hard drive and a CPU and the case and the monitor. It must be an easier business. But it ends up the software business isn't easier anyway, because the software companies have to spend roughly the same amount that a computer company spends on the hard drive and the CPU on marketing. Because if you're a software company, nobody knows you're there unless you invest heavily in marketing. So that's when I learned there's really no easy way out. So when I started investing, and what is still true today, SV Angel only invests in software startups. It's all about software. And a lot of people say to me, why are you successful after 30 years? We stick to our knitting. We said 30 years ago, we think software is a great market. Software is still a great market. Why get distracted? So when we started our first fund, I started it with Ben Rosen, who was then the chairman of Compaq, and he had just left Seven Rosen Partners, which invested in Compaq and Lotus. Remember, Lotus was the first spreadsheet. And Ben and I both had gray hair and some net worth from our companies. And we said, if we're going to go work on startups, let's pick something that is nascent, that if it starts at zero, we can watch it grow forever. And so let's invest in this thing called the internet. So in 1994, we decided we would only invest in internet startups. Netscape was not around yet. Mark Andreessen was still a student at the University of Illinois. So literally in the first 2 years, we looked at every single internet startup, and it was probably 100 companies. Then Netscape came along, and we knew that Netscape would commercialize the web, that Netscape would give consumers a way of accessing all the knowledge. And up till this point, the web was really described as TCP/IP. It was a protocol. But when Mark Andreessen was recruited to Silicon Valley by Jim Clark, along with about 4 other Mosaic founders from the University of Illinois, that changed everything. And I basically lived at Netscape and followed around everyone from Netscape. If you were a Netscape employee, you were our pal, because we knew that anyone, all doors led to Netscape. For example, Yahoo, many years later Google. But Netscape was the formidable founder where everything blossomed. Today, we think crypto is going to be Web 3.0. And the analogy that I use is that Netscape was just founded. That's about where we're at in crypto. We have 5 years to go, before people really realize the opportunity, and there's huge applications. But we think crypto today is where Netscape was the day it was founded.
I need to write down gray hair and some net worth is probably the coolest Twitter bio anyone can ever have.
Glasses.
So you've been very consistent in your sort of investment thesis since day one, which is that you say you invest in founders, and founders are what dominate everything. And so investing in founders practically means is investing in some traits that those founders have. And so I was wondering what those traits were and whether you think they're traits that one can develop or they're traits that you're naturally born with.
Well, yes, our attitude from the beginning is that we invest in people first, the idea second. And so whenever we talk to a founder, we're thinking about the traits that are in this handout that hopefully each of you got. And I believe that being a founder is genetic. I think there's a founder gene, and all the founders in this room have that gene. Now, you have to, and you can't really lose that gene. So once a founder, usually always a founder. Larry and Sergey and Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey are not going anywhere. If they go somewhere, they'll start another company. But knowing the traits that are important for success are some of the traits that we look for when we're talking to a founder. Leadership is one of them. The reason we look for leadership and a founder that can communicate well is once your idea takes off, then it's mission critical that you're able to go talk engineers, because engineers are the first key hires you're going to make. Talk engineers out of leaving wherever they're working today and coming to work for you. When that's a startup, that's hard. So that takes leadership. It takes passion. It takes conviction about your idea that you're able to talk someone into joining a startup. But if you have that trait, you'll quickly recruit a great engineering team. Making decisions is so important. I always say procrastination is the devil. You have to keep the company moving, and if you're not making decisions fast enough, the rest of your team is going to know you're not, and they're going to get restless. Keep in mind, your team is as smart as you. So if you think there's an issue, there probably is an issue, and go fix it as quickly as you can. Focus is important in the beginning. You have to stay focused on your idea. Now, you have to be able to admit that maybe the idea is wrong, and you quickly morph and reposition. That's another trait of leadership. But staying focused and not getting distracted is important. Just working hard. Starting a company is the hardest thing ever. It's 24/7, no distractions, no dabbling, because it takes your heart and soul to go build a huge company. That's it for now.
That already gives me 20 more follow questions. So in some order. First, you mentioned that sort of drive and ambition you think is innate and can't really be acquired. I sort of agree and disagree. I think that to some extent ambition is a function of the environment that you're in, and I'm pretty sure that when companies come to the family, when they join YC, or when they just join the sort of Ron Conway network, their ambition probably increases very, very quickly as they encounter people who are a lot more ambitious than they are, as they see people who've achieved amazing things. And I'm wondering to what extent that's actually some of the value add that you provide, is connecting founders who think that their startup could be worth X and actually understand that their startup could be worth 100X.
Yes, I believe that leading by example is something that an investor can really help a founder with, in addition to all the other value add. But getting funded is a great badge of honor. It means that somebody feels strongly enough about you that they are investing in your company and your dream. Once you get money from an outside investor, then you have even more responsibility, because then you're a fiduciary. And then you feel even more obligated to work 24/7. You feel even more obligated to make decisions quickly and recruit a great team. So the answer is yes. Once you get around good investors, they will help motivate you. And plus, they're the ones that have to help you make that next round of investment come in as well, which means you've got to show them some metrics so they can go bring in other investors.
The other thing you mentioned is that, so you said always founders first, idea second. And so I'm wondering, sometimes you probably have people come into your office or send you a deck or whatever, and you're like, I really like this person, but I'm really super unsure about what he's trying to build. What's the craziest gamble you took with that? So loving the founder and being very, very skeptical about the sort of industry that he was trying to tackle or problem he was addressing.
There's a lot of examples there.
Give them all.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg would be the first. So we were investors in Napster, and I could write 10 books about the trials and tribulations of Napster. How many of you remember Napster? How many of you used it? Wow, and there's some people without gray hair who used it. That's awesome. You must have used it when you were 10. But Napster was one, we're off topic here, but Napster was one of the few companies where my kids who were in grammar school and like freshman and sophomore in high school, they said, Dad, you finally invested in a cool company. Like, you should go run that company. And it ends up Napster was the biggest horror show of any investment I had ever made because we were going up against the record industry. And for the record, the first thing Sean Fanning and I did when we invested is we went to LA and met with a bunch of music lawyers and said, if you can believe this, we're very worried. We have like 500,000 users using this service where you can share music, and we want to work with you to hurry up and get it licensed. And here we are 25 years later, and that problem never really got fixed until streaming came in with Spotify and services of the last 5 years. So the record companies don't move fast. But Sean Parker, the co-founder of Napster, was the first president of Facebook. And Sean Parker came to me and said, there's this really cool company. And I know Sean Parker was a great founder because he had been through Napster. There's this great company called Facebook, and I want you to mentor me and Mark Zuckerberg. And I said, I'm happy to, but I'll never be a user, and I never have been. Zuck did have one meeting where he said, I really want you to use the service. And I said, well, if I use the service, it means I won't be able to run out and work about all and help solve the problems we're talking about in the meeting. And he said, you know what? Don't bother. Same thing with Jack Dorsey. So, but Mark Zuckerberg was very focused on growth and user experience. Those are the only two things that he worried about. A PR person would say, oh, you need to talk to the press, go away. If I manage the user experience and build a great product, people will use the product, and this will be a great company as a byproduct. If I get distracted from that, then I'm not going to be a big company. And every time I met with him, he would show me the chart of the growth of the company. That's a great founder that knows it's all about the users. And if you're growing users, you're going to be successful. These startups are ugly. You know that. But if you're growing, hallelujah. You're making progress. In one meeting I had with Zuck, I said, and I have to say, he lied to me, which is insulting. But I said, how big is this company going to get? And this is early days, and he said, we are going to have 300 million users. And he lied to me by 1.7 billion users. But that's
I'm sure you're not too mad at him.
Pardon me?
I'm sure you're not too mad at him.
Not at all. The other company was Twitter. I mean, in the early days of Twitter, who knew what that use case was going to evolve into? But Evan Williams and Jack Dorsey, the co-founders, we had invested in their prior company called Odeo. And Evan Williams had high net worth because he had sold his company to Google. And Evan, as insane as it was, Odeo failed, and he gave everyone back what they invested from his own pocket. I said, Ev, you're crazy. We're all big people here. Not 40% of our companies all go out of business completely. And Ev said, no, I feel obligated. I said, okay, I'm just going to put it in escrow, and whatever you do next, I'm going to invest in that, $75K. And that there became Twitter. So Ev said, do you want to invest in the next one? I said, it's in escrow. Of course I'm investing.
That's a good. So you didn't even really choose to invest in Twitter.
Twitter was the one company I did not choose to invest in. It was in escrow. So Twitter was another one where it was definitely the founders that we invested in. Now Google, we cheated a little bit because we had invested in Ask Jeeves. And Ask Jeeves, before Google was even, well, right as Google was founded, Ask Jeeves went public. We knew search was a huge application on the internet. But once we went and looked at Google and saw the quality of the search results, this simple thing that we all take for granted today, PageRank, if you like a website and you like a website and you go to it, all the Google algorithm said was, if the 5 people in the front row like that website and somebody new comes in, let's just send them to that website. That's all that algorithm was to start with. Now it's gotten a lot better. Google's a company who never became complacent. They continue to disrupt themselves in search. Tens of thousands of engineers are making that search engine better. Because I thought maybe they would get complacent after going public. No way. They're paranoid, which is good, especially in a big market like that. And now I don't even know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did, absolutely. One thing that you keep saying cofounders, plural. And so one question I have is, how reticent are you to invest in solo founder companies? And if you are, why is that the case?
Starting a company is hard. I believe you have to be born with DNA to do it. But starting a company by yourself is even harder. So we do feel much better when there's 1 or 2 founders. If there's 3 or 4, even better. Y Combinator specifically is very nervous about a single founder. God forbid, just what if something happened to that founder? But teamwork is everything. And if you have a co-founder going through the trials and tribulations every day, you'll feel better about getting up and working another day versus doing it by yourself. A lot of people talk about Airbnb and the phenomenon of Airbnb. And my answer to Airbnb growing so fast, because Airbnb, an obtuse application that nobody knew if it would work. But Airbnb had 3 founders who complemented each other. They had one that wanted to be the CEO, one who wanted to be the engineer, and one who wanted to be the head of product, Joe, Nate, and Brian. Plus you had these 3 founders evangelizing the mission and the culture every day. The other thing that a founder has to do, they have to evangelize the mission and culture to every human being in the building. If they do a good job of that, you have a company that is so motivated, you have to get out of their way because they're so determined. But if you have a weak culture, you're in trouble. Airbnb happens to have a great culture because there's 3 founders who each get the mission perfectly in their head, and they communicate it to everyone in their department. So the more founders, the merrier. With Larry and Sergey at Google, the fearsome twosome.
So sure, the more founders the merrier, but also there is some form of founder risk when you have more people, and you run the risk of them not getting along. And you've done this now thousands of times. What do you look for when you meet the founders? How do you detect if they're going to get along well in the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Funny enough, when you're talking to founders, and one of the things we do look for is, are the 2 or 3 founders going to get along, and are we going to have to be a marriage counselor down the road? In some cases, we've actually told the founders beforehand, we don't think you're going to get along. But in other cases, as time goes on, then the founders have had to separate after the company's gotten bigger. So one of the things you want to avoid is management turmoil. That's part of having a strong culture and a strong mission. And if the founders can't agree on the mission, then it is best that one of the founders go. That's a painful process, but it is a self-awakening that usually all the employees know about anyway, and they're relieved that you're fixing it. Whenever a founder fixes a big problem, morale goes up, not down, because the rank and file, the employees and the team members say, oh, thank God, they're awake. They're awake. They know that they have problems and they're fixing them. So that's why you have to make decisions and fix things fast, because the rank and file in the company, they know where all the problems are.
Yeah, that's a problem we see time and time again with founders, is typically when they realize that something isn't going that well in the company. Initially, they have some sort of impulse of keeping it to themselves within the founding team and maybe management. And then, the team, of course, the broader team is smart and knows that things aren't going that well. And then all of a sudden they come to their team and they're like, okay, we only have X amounts of months left of cash in the bank. And all of a sudden the entire team becomes super creative and find ways to survive. We have examples of that happening every other month with the family. And that's a mistake that even if you warned the founders, it happens time and time again. I'm wondering if there's any other thing that comes to your mind of systematic mistakes where you've warned the founder, this is going to happen, and yet they do it and fall into that trap.
Well, it's all about not procrastinating and not festering. When you see an issue, just go fix it as fast as you can. If you make a mistake, and startups are about making mistakes, you can go back and correct it and just keep iterating. But don't let things fester.
So one thing that you definitely don't let fester is your deal flow. You've done hundreds and hundreds of deals. I know that most of the deals that you end up doing, or if not all of the deals, come through referrals. And so I was wondering what sort of process you have in managing that deal flow. So sourcing the deals and then managing the ones that come in.
Yes. SV Angel, we see about 100 opportunities a week. And we have about 3 people that just manage that incoming deal flow. Because keep in mind, most of our deal flow comes from the network of founders and other investors that we've developed over the last 30 years. Our biggest asset by far is our relationship network. But that relationship network produces about 100 opportunities a week. And for 30 years, we've been investing in 1 company a week. So we invest in roughly 50 companies a year. So 30 years ago, when there were fewer opportunities coming in the door, let's say 10 a week, we invest in 1 out of 10. Over the years, we have had to become, as the market got bigger, even more discriminating about picking that 1 company a week. In the early days, our failure rate was about 60%. The company would go away. Because we've been around so long and are more discerning, and the quality of our deal flow is better because our network is so good, now our failure rate's about 40%.
So 2 questions related to that. First, as you mentioned, most of your deal flow comes from either investors that you've worked with in the past or founders that you've invested in. And so it actually makes it quite hard for people who want to come into the angel investing business to create that network. In some way, you get sort of network effects, right? The better you become in investing and the more people you invest in, the better the quality of the deal flow and the more deals you can do. So my first question is, what would be your advice to, or if Ron Conway had to start again, how do we come into this business? And then the second question, you also mentioned that your failure rate has gone down. and yet you still keep that portfolio approach of trying to diversify your bets and investments as much as possible, not as much as possible, at least 1 week a deal. Why haven't you been tempted to become a bit more concentrated in your investment?
Oh, well, I'll answer in reverse order, and you'll have to remind me if I don't answer them all. But now I forgot the last thing you said.
Diversification versus portfolio.
Oh, yeah. If you had to stereotype SV Angel, we've probably invested in more consumer portfolio companies than any other, because you look at Google, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Square, Stripe. We have, since the beginning, tended to attract founders of consumer internet companies, but we also invest in SaaS and and other types of software as well. We're shifting to a focus on crypto. We do have this advantage that we've built this network, and because we're advocates for founders, we do not take board seats. Board of directors oversee management. That means board of directors over 10 years for sure are going to get numerous disagreements with the founders. That's not SV Angel's mission. Companies need boards, just not us. We are always advocates for founders. So when a founder has a problem with the board, they can come to us and say, we think our board is not treating us fairly. Because we feed so many opportunities into the VC network out there, when we call a large VC who is on a board, they will tend to want to listen to us. And then your first question was, would I do this? Would I do this starting today? That is a very hard question, because we believe that valuations today are lofty. We think there is a lot of sloppy money out there that doesn't add a lot of value. So, quite honestly, being an angel investor today doesn't carry the cachet that it carried 10 years ago, when you had experience and you could add value to a company. There's a lot of investors out there today who I do not believe add value. They just have dollars. Now, I believe that founders are so courageous to start a company. I want every founder on earth to get funded. So I talk out of both sides of my mouth. So more companies are getting funded, and that's good, but not necessarily by investors that are going to be able to give the founder that much advice. But today, I would bet for every 200 companies that are founded, only 4 or 5 get funded. So the more money, the merrier. Just being old-fashioned in this business, we think you should add value, and with our huge relationship network, we're able to add value. Keep in mind, most of our founders today starting a company, they want to have a relationship with Google, Facebook, Twitter, Square, for example, Pinterest. And guess what we get to say? Oh, we can probably help you there. We funded the company and we placed most of the management team. That's the strength of SV Angel. Somebody will come to us and say, I need to get hold of this person at Google, and we just giggle and say, well, yeah, we introduced them to Google 20 years ago. They'll answer our email. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's
and keep in mind, everyone in these companies respects founders. They were all founders one day.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about this job, is that you're a picker one day of the week, but you're also an advisor the other. And so I was wondering how you thought about those two different roles. So choosing the companies that you invest in and advising them, and whether you think that you're always the best or whether you think that you're the best in SV to be picking or advising, and how you managed those two roles.
Good question. In the early days, I had to be the picker. Ben Rosen and I were the pickers for 4 or 5 years. Over time, we expanded the SV Angel team, and about 6 years ago, my youngest son actually joined SV Angel. And it was about 6 years ago that I spent a lot of time teaching our team the nuances of picking out these traits in a founder, and I slowly stopped being a picker. I do not pick companies anymore. The SV team picks companies now. I spend my time in what I enjoy even more, which is giving high-level advice to founders. And that's what I really like. So I spend most of my time with 3 or 4 founders, helping them with whatever problem they have and just helping solve that problem. And it's a myriad of issues depending on the company. But I really enjoy working with Ben Silberman at Pinterest, or Brian Chesky at Airbnb, or Brian Armstrong at Coinbase, Coinbase is starting a whole new industry. They're like the Netscape of crypto. It's going to be interesting to see that. So the reason I love doing this is I'm curious like you are, and love just help getting these problems solved for founders. I also spend a third of my time on civic engagement and philanthropy. And funny enough, there's a lot of unrest going on in the United States right now. I think we have a president who is a disgrace to the world, and I let people know that, and hopefully democracy did work on the midterms. Didn't work enough, but in 2020 we have to fix things in the U.S. But in the world today, so I spend my time on philanthropy and civic engagement, a third of it. But to digress for a second, there's an income inequality gap around the world. The yellow coat issue here, the USA has it, and unfortunately we ended up with Donald Trump as a result. That's a huge mistake, so hopefully don't make that mistake. But one of the companies I'm proud of, because they also have a social mission, is Airbnb. Airbnb has 2 missions that have a social purpose. They allow people to augment their income by bringing someone into their home. Just in France, over $2 billion a year goes into the pockets of Airbnb hosts in France to help augment their income. I'm proud of Airbnb for that. I think it's awesome. The other thing is these hosts in France are welcoming people from around the world, and they're making the world a better place because people are communicating with each other. In a time of unrest where a lot of people are polarized, Airbnb, not unwittingly, but they have this mission they're fulfilling of people around the world are being civil and talking to each other because they're using other people's bedrooms. How cool is that? We just need to make that bigger and make the world a better place. So Pinterest, I think, has a social mission as well, where people share and discover things together on the internet. If Twitter was edited better, Twitter would be a good place, especially if we could get Trump off it.
So I want to speak about philanthropy and civic engagement, and we will at the end. I just want to come back a tiny bit to angel investing quickly. So you mentioned that. So you mentioned something that sort of really resonates here. We say very often that capital has become a commodity, in the sense that you can find it quite easily, and it has a sort of fixed price. And so I was wondering what, in your opinion, was the angelic angel, the ideal one that you should be looking for. Your son said recently that there was a lot more value that you could provide, and that it wasn't really dependent on the size of the checks that you're writing. And I completely agree with that. And so I was wondering what the value is, and some examples that you can give.
Yeah, a good angel investor, this is cliche, but a good angel investor is somebody who's investing because they love to be with founders and helping founders solve problems, not because they want to make a buck. Making money in angel investing, I believe making money is a byproduct if you've added value to the companies you've invested in. And if you're in it to make the money, founders see that right away, And that is the sloppy money I'm talking about. We get our satisfaction just picking up the phone and answering emails for founders with obtuse problems. Even, their parent is ill and they need someone to go take care of that parent while they run the company. SV Angel, that's the kind of problems we love to solve for founders. These are the personal issues that allow them to go tend to the company and not have to worry about other issues that they have. It's about being advocates for founders. It's not about money. And I know that's cliche, but a good angel investor is not doing it for money.
Yeah, you'd be signing bigger checks if you're only doing it for the money, probably. You're essentially describing a family in a way, which is a convenient coincidence. I want to hear your opinion about France. You've been here for a while now, and you come quite often, I think I understood. You haven't made that many investments outside of the US. Have you made any?
We have made a few investments outside the US, but not a lot. And shame on us, but we keep visiting. But this thing in San Francisco keeps booming, and it's all walking distance from our office. But I have been coming to France for over 20 years. I happen to be addicted to the south of France in the summer. Who's been to Club 55 or Cinq on Cinq? Oh, not a lot. That says you're working hard. That's good. And then we always come to Paris in the winter. And I meet with a lot of ministers in France to try and help them in their quest to bring business, startups to France. And then in the case of SaaS companies, in some cases, it's better for that company to move to the US because that's where you can test out SaaS ideas the best. And Business France, have you heard of that organization? Is an organization just about spreading entrepreneurship, and they're doing a great job. In fact, the ambassador for that is the former CEO of Cisco, John Chambers.
Yeah, we had him on stage here a couple months ago.
Oh, awesome. He's here a lot too.
Can you give us a little peek at what you were telling the ministers about how to make France a more attractive place?
Well, some of it the country has already done with the tax rates. There was a huge disparity in tax rates, and depending on how you calculate it, in California we have another 13% of tax. If you're in California, for sure the taxes in France are less than the United States. That was not the case 18 months ago. But some of the labor issues on termination process and things like that can be improved as well. And we are getting assurances that the government of France is working on those issues so that you have parity with other countries around the world. You don't have to be better, but parity would help.
So before we turn to questions from everyone else, I wanted to speak briefly about philanthropy, which was what you mentioned. I was wondering what you were looking into particularly. I saw that you are part of the 1% pledge. We have an equivalent here where we talk about Founders Pledge to founders. And I was wondering how you think about philanthropy, how it comes into your life and the sort of areas that you're generally interested in.
Yes, I'm a big believer that you should give back. And I want to give a pitch for the Giving Pledge that Bill Gates founded. Has everyone heard of the Giving Pledge? Well, that's good because that says you're really ambitious because you can't even join the Giving Pledge unless you have a net worth of $1 billion and you commit to give half of it away. But many tech founders of larger companies have committed to the Giving Pledge. Okay, so that's on the back end. On the front end, when you start a company, your company, and you're philanthropically minded, you can pledge 1% of the equity of the company that will become a foundation that all the team members of the company can decide what causes they want to give that money to. In the United States, Salesforce.com, Yelp, these companies, by the time they went public, that 1% was worth over $50 million. And the team members took great pride in picking the causes to give that to. The equivalent here, I think, is the founder pledge. And is that also 1% recommended?
You can give more if you want.
Well, of course you can give more, but if you give just 1% of your equity into a foundation, when you recruit your new employees, you need to tell them, we are members of the founder pledge. That tells new employees something about your culture, that your culture is a culture that wants to give back. That's a cultural trait that new employees want to see. So it's actually, what I'm arguing is it's a benefit to you to join the founder pledge.
And so
and encourage volunteerism as well.
And so areas you're particularly interested in philanthropy and civic engagement?
In philanthropy, I personally am very much into education causes, helping people get from middle school to high school to college. These are underprivileged students, and getting them through college, usually the first member of their family that's gotten through college. And then all kinds of causes to do with sick children. And then I'm very active with forward.us to solve the immigration crisis in the United States. We have 800,000 dreamers that Donald Trump wants to mistreat, and we're not going to let him do that.
Yeah, something we're quite passionate about as well. We're actually starting a new program in Berlin to help people from outside Europe come build their companies in Berlin, and we help them relocate and start their companies there. And so if Trump is kicking out all those people, then they'll have a place to come, hopefully in Berlin, for the founders.
That's awesome.
So before we open to questions from the audience, I'd like to invite everyone to give a warm round of applause to Ron. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Que la famille